Welcome, Sir John, and thank you for sparing the time to join us this afternoon. There are three important issues I'd like your opinion on, and they relate mainly to Brexit, to economic growth, and to the independence of the Bank of England and the OBR. This week, Sir Keir Starmer said that Brexit had been botched and has been a disaster. Do you agree with that?
Well, Keir Starmer should know because, of course, he was one of the leading advocates of having a second referendum and getting us back in. He now wants to undermine the Brexit freedoms we have exercised because he and so many other MPs didn't like the verdict of the British people, and quite a lot of the officials and the main institutions of the state were also very reluctant to use the wonderful freedoms we've now gained. But despite the fact that they refused to do the things that were so obvious once we were free to choose, we've got a lot of Brexit wins under the belt already. Take the money, for example. 17 billion of cost and lost taxes to the EU. No longer do we have to pay that. And so we're putting more than the amount said on the side of the bus into the NHS. And we've been able to do that because we don't have to pay all this money to the EU anymore. And those gains are going to get bigger and bigger because the EU is now going on a borrowing binge. They're about to borrow 800 billion euros on top of all the debt member states have got. And we won't be responsible for a penny of that. Whereas if we'd been in it, then around 120 billion of that would have been effectively the debt we had to pay for on top of the massive national debt we've got. Then there are the trade deals. They said we wouldn't be able to do trade deals outside the EU. Nonsense. We've done far better ones, far faster than the EU was ever able or willing to do. So we got an Indian trade deal, Trans-Pacific trade deal, Australian trade deal, New Zealand trade deal. And what's more, they're tailored for our needs and requirements because the EU wouldn't put big service clauses into their trade deals because they mainly sold goods apart from the UK. And the UK is mainly a service exporter. And all these Remainers who go on about we're not trading enough, they don't look at our colossal success since 2016. We've shot up from being the fourth biggest service exporter in the world to being the second biggest service exporter in the world, second only to the United States of America. And a lot of that success is because we're looking outwards, we're playing the global market, not just the EU market, and we now have free trade deals made for us.
Yes, all that is absolutely spot on, and so encouraging to hear you say all of that. The problem, of course, is going to be to get that message out as far and as wide as it should be. Just moving on to the second area, which is economic growth. The government's mantra has been since they took office is one of growth, growth, and growth. But of course, what they've done is basically policies of anti-growth. If you were advising the government, Sir John, what would you tell them to do to stimulate growth?
Well, of course, they should have a proper growth policy rather than the anti-growth policy you've rightly identified. We need much cheaper energy. So instead of signing up to even more crippling high-priced energy and high energy taxes and carbon taxes with and in the EU, we should be doing the opposite and going for cheaper energy. Our industry is being closed down. It's not competitive because the energy is all too dear. We need to be closer to the American model, not the European Union model. And do these Remainers not understand that this century so far, 25 years, has been a complete disaster for the EU? The US has grown twice as fast as the EU. So as of today, the GDP per head, the national output per head, is twice as high in the United States of America as the European Union average. And ours is only 20% ahead of the EU average. We need to get ours up closer to America. You're not going to do that by rejoining the EU or putting yourself under all their laws and regulations. Their problem is that they regulate too much. They don't allow enterprise to breathe. And you don't have to hear that from John Redwood, because I'm well known as an enthusiast for a freer trading, more independent Britain. But Mr. Draghi, one of the architects of the great European scheme, former head of the European Central Bank, has written a wonderful report explaining to Europe, if only they'd listen, that they are not competitive. They're overtaxing, they're overgoverning, there are far too many rules and regulations, there would soon be far too much debt. So they are just falling further and further behind. We're not going to get growth and be more prosperous by joining more closely to that group.
No, and of course our government should see this, but unfortunately, they don't seem to have anyone of any competence there that can take get a grip of the economic situation. Just moving on now to the Bank of England and the OBR. Of course, it was Gordon Brown who gave the independence to the Bank of England to set interest rates and to control inflation. And George Osborne, of course, who created the OBR as rather like the government's spending watchdog and auditor. How do you think this has worked out?
Well, it's been extremely disappointing. And I'm not suggesting that we should stop the Bank of England having the power to set interest rates or to be responsible for inflation. But they clearly need to change what they're doing and change some of the people around the table. Because on their watch, not so long ago, inflation hit 11%. And they say, oh, well, that's because there was a war in Ukraine and energy prices shot up. Well, then, Bank of England, why was it that our inflation rate was already 6%, 3 times target, before the invasion started? And why was it, Bank of England, that China and Japan and Switzerland, with their own central banks following tighter and better monetary policies, inflation stayed at 2%? Surely, Bank of England, you've got to revise your models and get sharper at controlling inflation. And when it comes to the OBR, what are they meant to do? Well, they're meant to control the debt and deficit. But it shot up. Some of that was unavoidable because of COVID, but some of it is now because we're overspending and not reining in and appreciating that we've got to get much more value for our public money. So the OBR has also got to change what it does. There's got to be a change in the framework, because we need a framework that stops excessive borrowing and debt, whereas the OBR saying, oh, well, let's try and control year 5 is never going to control our debt and deficit, because the government can just say, oh, we'll be honest in year 5. And of course, year 5 never comes.
Yes, it seems to me that the problem has been one of control. The Bank of England and Andrew Bailey seem just not to have been in control of inflation. And with the OBR, they just seem to be exercising too much control. So it's really a rather difficult situation. The OBR seems to have become something of a Frankenstein's monster, frankly.
Well, the OBR interferes with what the Chancellor wants to do, but doesn't succeed in achieving what they ought to be doing with the Chancellor, which is to make sure that our debt and deficit is under proper control. And it's because our debt and deficit isn't under control and has been made far worse by the current Chancellor because she boosted both spending and borrowing far too much in her 2 budgets, that we're constantly on the lookout for tax rises when we need tax cuts, and constantly saying we can't afford all the public services we've got, when if we got the economic growth, which would come from the tax cuts, they would then be more affordable.
Well, thank you, Sir John, for that. That was most interesting and informative, and I certainly learnt a lot. Thank you very much.